a good starting point with the different generations and the focus on young people currently is we can talk about the many differences that we have based on our histories and experiences, but we can decide to focus on what the similarities across all generations. One thing that is clear, evident, is we have a desire for personal growth and for contribution to our societies. We all want to make meaningful impacts with the people around us and with the larger society. And so understanding that and coming to a point of collaboration between different generations, more so now with the young people, is something that we need to also embrace with our cultures. And my focus on indigenous knowledge, and now this is very specific to wildlife conservation, is what has amplified that even more. When I was doing a lot of my dissertation research, I came to learn that our grandparents, of course, they are very connected to different elements of the environment, the ecosystem with the wildlife. And my grandmother was a herbalist, and there's certain knowledge that they have that unfortunately we've lost now. And for me to do my dissertation, it was I remember having a conversation with my mom, and I have a lot of cats around the house, and I tend to get allergies, but I just can't keep off them. And she told me, well, if only your grandma was around, she would have given you, specific herbal medicine that would have helped with the allergies. And I was curious as to why she didn't know those specific herbal medicines, or my aunties. And this is knowledge that is supposed to be passed down generation to generation, because it's not only beneficial to us, but also to our healthcare systems, and to our well-being. And I think it's now at this point when we've lost the knowledge is when we are trying to track back the bits of what's remaining, and hopefully understand also the experiences of the people in the past. But when it comes to now even the laws that govern us and the policies, it's very important for us to adapt to the new cultures, but at the same time be rooted to our values and principles that guide us and that create now this identity of what it means to be African. And I believe this starts more so with the education system. It should speak Africa. If you ask me directly what it means to be Africa, I would say it's just it's greatness. We have gone through a lot with our histories, and there's a lot of resilience that comes out from that. And now is when we are immersing ourselves out there like a butterfly out of a cocoon and showing our greatness even more. So of course, being a very beautiful continent with beautiful people and wildlife and the ecosystem and the cultures, the only way to preserve this and to be authentic in current times is by also embracing now our guiding principles in life, regardless of us being in a global village. Basically, it's a global village. We move around nowadays. There's no limits to where you can go. But wherever you go, I think Africans should speak for itself, and ultimately preserving our indigenous knowledge and bridging that. Now, what I'm trying to do in the conservation space, bridging that with now the modern sciences and technology is key. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mimo. As you were speaking, and I got a tinge about you speaking about that disconnect that happened with our grandparents to our parents and then to us. I thought about my own parents, who, that generation of those who were born just before or right after our countries attained independence, and their need to assimilate, their need to speak English, their need to learn, their need to kind of distance themselves from some of these indigenous practices. And then you see the generation that comes after, us, who are yearning to go back to that kind of knowledge, who are yearning to go back to what we were, and looking for ancestry and trying to trace even when perhaps the people who would have taught us are not here. And I think that that's an important thing to just center as we're thinking about these contested claims for identity about who we are and where we're going. And King David, I want to bring you into the conversation because one of the things that is continuously contested as we talk about this is this question of religion, culture, knowledge, what we define knowledge to be, what we define culture to be. Now, as a creative, you are an extension of a shaper of culture, right? And no doubt you've come face to face with this conflict within your work. What do you see as the place for religion, culture, knowledge, education, and some of these institutions that stand as preservers of them in today's Africa and particularly among young people? Sorry, David, you're on mute.
That's a really big question. It has so much in it. So we're just to ensure I properly answer that, you asked me the place of religion. So can you go over the question again? I want to ensure I have it like I have good grasp of it,
Okay.
properly answered.
So the place of religion, culture, what we come to define as education or even just knowledge production, and the institutions that are set up to preserve these, right? What's the place, if any, at all, in today's Africa or just among young people? Do we even think of them as important? How do we define them? So just you can answer it how you
Yes,
you
okay.
desire.
Yes, that gives me, thank you. I think it has a very strong place in the grand scheme of things. I have this what I call it a mantra that I live by, or a philosophy. I say science gives us the tools to live our life, while art tells us how to live our life. Because science will give you your phone, science will give you a car, science will give you textile, but art will tell you you can make this. Why not try making this out of this? Use this way. Because even our perception of things science has given us is shaped by art. People look at Instagram as a platform for people look at TikTok as a platform for people to just doom scroll and just do whatever. Science provided TikTok, but it's what people create, how they express their creativity on there that shapes how we see. That's just to explain the concept of art and science. I believe entertainment, education, culture is shaped by the kind of art we make. So it's very significant. The stories we tell, how we tell those stories. I wrote in my notes when we're trying to define what it means to be African, and thinking about that, the person who is in the entertainment space, there is a stereotype of what it means to be African globally. There's because right now being African in quotes is commercial. There's Burna Boy, there's Wizkid, there's Ira Star, there's all these people. There's this picture of what it means to be African. There is, even in Nigeria right now, there's something called the Altebu, the Alte community. There is a way people perceive folks within my age range, the Gen Zs, is the way people see us here in Nigeria that is framed by how people put themselves out on the internet. It's the way we see these people. But in the actual sense, I was speaking to a friend a couple months ago, and he was like, everyone sees Gen Zs in Nigeria as the way they see the Alte community. And it's not true. If you really want to know what a Gen Z in Nigeria really sees the world as, don't ask these people in like Teslas wearing only God knows what. Go meet the kid who is 15 and is in his classroom with his friends. Ask him what he thinks of the world. That's what really is. So apart from what is regarded as the commercial perspective or commercial perception of being African, I feel we need to step in through education, through art, to actually reshape that, put people who actually are. If you ask me, what does it mean to be African? I would say to be in tune with your heritage and the people around you. And that can take any form. It can take any form, because really, what defines culture? Culture is how you live your life. And what frames your choices in how you live your life? It's the people you've learned from and where you're having to live life, really. My clothing, my choice of clothing, as much as I am in, is largely influenced by Western culture because of what I see and what's made available. So if we want to, I feel like I'm touching on a lot of things here. Pardon me, where my brain works. If we want to preserve certain things, we need to ensure we're putting it forward, constantly putting it forward. And we should also not be averse to the idea of things being a little different from how they were. Because I am so sure, can't remember her name. I think it's Memo, who was talking about her grandmother and how her grandmother was in tune with nature and knowing how to use various herbs. I sometimes I look through TikTok and I see certain people talk about certain things that, okay, my mom used to give me this when I was a child, but because they are older now and they have certain things available to them, or they have some of those things in different forms available to them, they still make use of those things in a different way, but it still shows that they're in tune with that. So bringing it back to your question again, to ensure that I feel like in my attempt to go to it, I'm veering into various things. Sorry, tiny sprinkle of ADHD there, but yeah. But please, can you say the question again so I can bring it all together? And
No,
you're
actually doing quite well in answering
okay.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, so just maybe the question then is, we have a lot of these institutions that are set as the preservers of culture, of knowledge, right? And a lot of them are undergoing several criticisms about, and being unable to change or being unable to stay attuned to what young people are asking and desiring of them. How do they remain relevant, given that you have stated that, it is important that we're culturally and, otherwise attuned to our Africanness?
So I would say institutions should focus on, allow me to use the word educating people, but we should focus on telling our stories, because certain things would be more valued when we know why they are the way they are. Even to the things that we don't agree with anymore, we can still esteem them as valuable when we know why they are the way they are. So I think we should focus on letting the young people know these stories. I was having a conversation with an older friend a while back, and we're talking about how a lot of the issues we have in Africa is that we don't have so much of our history documented. So it's really hard to teach it. And even though we can't go so far back into our history, I think we can focus on preserving what we have now for those who are ahead of us. And like I said, we should not let our what's that word now? What we choose to preserve be shaped by the commercial image of what is African. Because we might want to create something that would sell, because we would want to ensure that our work, our efforts yields results quickly. Because sometimes it can be very frustrating when you know that which you're doing right now, it's not really yielding results that can preserve you in the moment. But creating with the mind of, okay, we're doing this for the future. We're not just selling a narrative of, okay, this is what's commercial. When someone needs something that's in quotes African, they can come to you like, okay, give us what works. Okay, this is going to be recorded, so I can't say something so I don't sound a little funny. But allow me to say a little, just be a little bit controversial. We saw Beyonce's Black is King, and I'll just say that and leave that there. I know it's a little controversial, but I'll just say that and leave that there. The accuracy of it can be questioned. It's because it's a portrayal of what is African, but really, come to Africa, see Africa. It's not necessarily that. It's a commercial image. So we should not get caught up in preserving what is commercial. We should preserve what is African. What is African? We should take time to look through the nitty-gritty, the details of who we are, the subtleties of who we are. And I think it's really interesting now because the way the world works now, it is easy for me to document something I learned from my grandma on TikTok. And I think we should foster that, putting our culture out there, encouraging people to put their lives, really documenting our lives online, because really the internet is how we save things these days. It's easy for me to just type, what does this and this and this look like on the internet, and I find it. And it's very funny how places like TikTok have like, people these days, for my generation, we spend more time looking up stuff on TikTok, not Google. Yeah, so like, really, something is happening. You really want to see, because it's easy for places like Google, it's easy for things to be a little, what's the word? When I say manipulated now with SEOs and whatnot, you can have certain things pushed forward. But when you go on TikTok, you search it, you see it. It's just what's there. So I think we should encourage people to put stuff out. I know I feel like I'm saying 101 things at once, but we should encourage people to put stuff out there that shows what we really are like. And I feel like being African is so, it's a very complex, our stories are very complex. It's so funny how you can be in one town, in one village, and I know of I can't really remember it, but there is a certain part of Africa where in one village there are two languages being spoken. So we are that complex. We're that nuanced, if I can use that word. So it will take each one of us as individuals, encouraging us to like put ourselves out there, to put our stories out there. And I think that's what I would say. Yeah, I said a lot of things here, but
No, you're good. Twasima, can I come in just with something really small? I'm just so moved to say something. So, King David, there was no need to apologize or to say it's going to be controversial. I think that's part of what Africa needs to do. You were correcting something that went out there as a representation of what Africa is. And while Africa is many diverse things, that commercial representation is problematic in and of itself. So feel free to always use your voice and state that. Because what Africa must do now, our histories, even our colonial voices taught to us, right? So if we don't have the boldness of doing what you just did, but do it, King David, unapologetically is what I would say. Thank you for doing it. Back to you, Twasima.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
if I may say something, Twasima, just to add to what she said. I create content on the internet. I make videos sharing things I learned from my personal relationships with people around me. I put that on the internet, and people sometimes say things like, are you African? Like, of course I am African, like duh, but do you live in Africa? And I'm like, yeah. And interestingly, half the things I talk about are things I learned from my dad and people around me. It's not from some fancy book somebody somewhere wrote somewhere. It's here, it's African, it's me, it's the people around me. So and sometimes I get caught up in the need to want to present myself in a way that fits into what is regarded as African. commercially, I make music, and sometimes I was speaking with a friend of mine who is a composer and a producer, and we're talking about what my music career will look like going forward. And it was like, well, Afrobeat is what's selling now. And the kind of music I make doesn't necessarily fit into the box of what is Afrobeat, but it's made by me. I am African. And if it's made by me, who is an African, then it is African. It might sound a little, but I feel like it doesn't get more African than that. Because one of the reasons why we regard things that have been made before now as African is because they were made by Africans.
Right.
So we should not at any point feel the need to, like I said, I keep going back to this commercial image to fit into the commercial image. Be yourself, because 100 years from now, when people want to, it should be accurate depiction of what it means to be African in 2024. Because I look at it, as much as we've had Western influences on our Africanness. Look at African fashion in the 90s. It's completely different from fashion in the US in the 90s. Of course, there are influences there, but it is very obvious. Because who we are is who we are, and we should not at any point feel the need to box ourselves. We should encourage people to express themselves, drawing influences from the things around them and the people around them. So yeah, thank you. I'm done.
Okay. First off, just to encourage the audience to send in questions, comments, we would love, we're gonna, after this round, maybe just check in with you and see how you're feeling, what you're picking up. Listen, David, you speak about a lot of things that I think are important, right? This question of who shapes the narrative of the African. A lot of our narratives are shaped by, when you talk about the commercialization of what it means to be African, a lot of our narratives are shaped by forces outside of ourselves, outside of the continent. And what does it look like to reclaim some of that? I hear you when you say the preservation of culture and knowledge through art is important, and just the importance of centering authenticity within that. We're going to talk a little bit later about some of the tools we have at our disposal, which perhaps were not there before. You talked a lot about TikTok and just being able to create and share knowledge back and forth a lot more easily than before. And I think that that's an important point to draw on a little bit later as we talk about what are the tools that are at our disposal right now. But I want to introduce one of the panelists who has just joined as I pose a question to her. Welcome, Zuhura. We're glad that you're able to join. Zuhura is the managing partner at Impact Leadership Academy in Tanzania, and she has 30 years experience within HR management, training, leading various businesses. She's also a recipient of the Women in Management Africa Award of 50 Influential Women in Management in Africa, and is a fellow of the African Leadership Initiative. Zuhura, I know that you're going to have a lot of experience and a lot to say around this question of who we are as Africans, what it means to center this call of Africanness within our leadership. But I want you just to begin by talking a little bit about some of the things that David has raised, particularly around this question of who shapes the narrative of the African, and how can we, perhaps if it's being shaped from outside of ourselves, what does it look like to tangibly reclaim this for ourselves?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I've joined a bit late. Within our Pan-African Africa Leadership Initiative, we lost our colleague, a fellow, and I was in a long funeral services, which was a national funeral, and I could not leave as early as I wanted to be with you. But here I am, and I have joined the discussion a bit late, but the question that you have posed is a very interesting question, because I, as a leader, I have a lot of hope for Africa, and that hope is in the abundance of the young people. It is a very youthful continent, and that is our comparative advantage in terms of where we are going in the future. That being a comparative advantage, it means we have to now to shift from where we were in terms of branding our continent and telling our stories. One of the best hope that I have in this generation, the generation which is being referred to as Gen Z, it is a very different generation compared to the previous ones. And why am I saying it's different? It is a generation that has been exposed quite a lot because of the information technology that we have experienced in the recent past. They are not as the past generation, like my generation. They have been interacting with the world, whether it is physical or digital platform, but they are not shackled by things that shackled my generation when I was growing up. With that expanded perspective, it is a generation that can help us to shape the narrative that has shackled Africa, as they refer to a dark continent. And I have a lot of hope in Gen Z in shaping that. But for that to happen, because I'm sitting in the human capital space, I think there is a lot that we need to do, especially the previous generation, my generation of baby boomer, Gen X, millennial, to really unleash the power of the Gen Z. Because the power of Gen Z lies in the ability to see the world differently, but also they are also very clever in terms of seeing the space of Africa in the coming years. And us as parents, grandparents, we have to recognize that. But the shift will not happen unless also we allow ourselves to change, to transform how we are interacting with this generation. And one thing that I've seen in my profession is not only provision of the top class education, but there are some cultural norms that we have to really say they are not helping us. For example, the high power index in Africa, where the grayer your hair is, the more resourceful you are, the more knowledge you have, and you are not ready to listen to somebody who is younger than you. And even if you look at the leadership, we have other continents where people rise to leadership very quickly under 30, like the people who are shaping the new India at the moment. The average age of the team which is shaping the new India is 29 years old. And that kind of diversity in terms of demographic diversity is seen quite a lot. And we can say India now is a subcontinent. It's a space to watch. And we are going to see a lot happening. Now, my cry is, my fellow leaders in Africa, are we ready to provide psychological safety to our Gen Zs? Because that is a very important ingredient, that they can be who they are without feeling guilty. And also, they are listened to, they are consulted, and they are allowed to ask hard questions. And us sitting in the leadership to be ready to respond to those hard questions with honesty and integrity. Something which I have not seen it so much, especially in the public and civil service, but also in the private sector. There is some kind of settled culture that we know it, and you cannot tell us. But in such a way, what we are doing as Africa, we are suffocating the human side of innovation. And the human side of innovation is not sitting with me, guys. It is with the Gen Z. My time is over, but am I, as a leader, courageous enough